So Terry, welcome. Warm welcome. I'm happy you made it and you came here.
It's a joy to be here. It's a joy to be with you, Thomas. It's really great to be here with you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Likewise. So I'm very happy that today you will share your wisdom with everybody. And maybe let's start with maybe what made you be interested in working with couples. I think that's why did you choose that track?
Well, they say that therapists are people who need to be in therapy 40 hours a week. So truly, I need all the help I can get. I come from a dysfunctional family, as I've written about. My mom was ineffective. My dad was depressed and violent, both emotionally and physically. And I honestly believe I became a therapist to figure out how to heal myself. And then I became a couples and family therapist to figure out how the heck to have a relationship, because what I saw growing up and what I saw in the culture gave me no equipment whatsoever. And so I set about trying to figure out how to do this. I like to say every man that I work with in therapy is really my father. And every man I heal is my father. And every man I don't heal is my father. And I grew up pretty much in a war zone. And let me say more generally, I believe that what we want now in relationships, myself included, is historically brand new. I believe that we have never seriously wanted intimacy in our long-term relationships and marriage. We wanted companionship and stability. And now all of us really want to be lifelong lovers. We want long walks on the beach and holding hands and sex in our 70s and beyond. And but our culture, patriarchal culture, which we all live under, simply doesn't give us the tools to realize that ambition. And so most of us are walking around pretty frustrated in our relationships, and we all know who's to blame.
So that was the morning lecture.
So I think I've been thinking a lot. Well, first of all, let me say to the group a couple things. This is a coming out for me for a number of reasons. This is the first time I presented around the world, and this is the first time I've ever presented barefoot. So I expect some real embodied information to come through. And I've been meditating and practicing for over 45 years. And I'm known as a therapist. And this is really the first time I'm speaking publicly about spiritual work and inhabiting that as somebody who can speak about spiritual work. So thank you all. Thank you.
Oh, that's amazing.
I've been thinking about what might be useful. And I think I'd like to start off with the idea of relationships as a spiritual practice to begin with. Because it was really the great spiritual teacher Krishnamurti who said that true autonomy is freedom from our own automatic responses. And I don't know of a crucible that will evoke automatic responses better. So I talk about first and second consciousness. I thought I might start there. Your first consciousness is your knee-jerk response. It comes out of your family of origin adaptation. And it's automatic. And it's very visceral. I talk about whoosh, W-H-O-S. It comes up from the feet, and it feels like the thing you must do. If you don't do this, the world's going to fall apart. Now, I've been doing this for 30 years, and let me give you an exercise. The first order of business is I've only seen 3 categories of first consciousness: fight, flight, and you can be standing 6 inches away from somebody and fleeing, right? That's called stonewalling. A lot of men know how to do that. Wah, 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 wah. And then fixing, which we therapists specialize in. That's like, oh my God, there's some tension in the room. Let me take it out. Yeah. So let me see hands. How many of you are fighters? First consciousness fighters. That's your knee-jerk response. Come on, be proud. Get them up there. How many fleers? Ah. And how many fixers? You fixers can give Thomas feedback about how we did today. My wife Belinda and I did a workshop on codependence. We got the best evaluations. It was like, oh, they're so good. They're great. Everybody thought we were great. Anyway. So here's the thing. You can be spiritual on the pillow. Not a big problem. Be spiritual when your partner is in your face screaming at you. I mean that. Be spiritual when you're feeling abandoned. Be spiritual when you're in the dark night of soul in a relationship and you think your relationship is a big mistake and you're trapped in it. Be spiritual then. And what I mean by be spiritual then is that when you feel that whoosh, you reach for a different part of the soul, different part of the psyche, prefrontal cortex in the brain. You reach for a part of you that can stop and breathe and think and be deliberate. I have a little institute. We're always struggling, and I have merchandise ideas. I want to do a Dr. Terry action figure at some point. I think that would be really great. We all had shitty childhoods. Get over it. But I want to get a t-shirt that says Relational Living on the front and I choose door B on the back. So it goes like this. I'm a fighter. I grew up in a fighting family. My wife Belinda's a fighter. She grew up in a fighting family. Our first consciousness is fight. So I would come, not now, because we're in pretty good recovery, and our kids are grown. When the kids were, it's a lot easier. You have a 7-year-old, right? She'll give you a lot of opportunity. Sometimes my wife Belinda and I stop and we look at each other and we smile, and one will say, I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to work on myself. That goes over real well. Anyway, you reach for a different part. So I would come home after being on the road like this. Belinda would be with little kids, and I would be met with rage, with self-righteous indignation. I can't believe it. You left me here alone with the kids, blah, 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 blah. And my whoosh would be rage. What I like to say, what my body wants to do is bop her in the nose. But being a feminist, I would relegate myself to verbal abuse. I can't believe it. I come home from teaching people how to love each other and I have to put up with this bullshit. So that's door A. I know what lies behind door A. I've been behind door A a million times. So in this moment, one of the things is that people say intimacy and relationships take work, but nobody tells you what it is. And I think the work of intimacy is not day by day, it's minute to minute. Seriously. In this moment right now, am I going to go this way or am I going to go that way? Am I going to go with this part of my soul or am I going to go with this part of my soul? Am I going to go with automatic or am I going to go with conscious? And for me, it's not enough just to be aware. That's a good first step. But it's not just mindfulness. You're aware of your automatic reaction. You're aware of what's going on in front of you. And on a good day, if Belinda goes like that and I have my whoosh, I'll stop. A voice inside of me will say, Terry, shut up. That's a very wise voice. And breathe and get centered and put up a boundary. Belinda's having a bad day. You don't have to make her a bad day. You're a bad day. Now, protected, centered, present to her, is there anything useful? And then I say, honey, you're right. You've been with the kids. You sit down, pour a glass of wine. I'll put them to bed, and then we'll talk. That door B is only possible to me because I've shifted my consciousness. And I call this relational mindfulness. Shifting out of the automatic part of us, I call it the adaptive child or wounded child part of us, the triggered part of us, to the present-based, thoughtful part of us that can love. Because one of the great questions is not, when I'm faced with a couple, and I'll let you get a question in a minute, when I'm faced with a couple, the most important question for me as the therapist is not, as I speak to them, what are the external stressors? A good couple can handle stress. And it isn't even primarily what's the dynamic between the two of them, although that's critical. The critical question is this: which part of you am I speaking to? Am I speaking to the centered, adult, present-based part of you that can do something? Or am I speaking to a triggered child part of you that's taken control of the wheel? And the first order of business is for us to deal with the inner children that get kicked up in us and not foist them off on our partners to deal with. So I like to say when an inner child kicks up, you want to put them on your lap, put your arms around them, love them, and demote them. Take your hands off the steering wheel and get in the back seat. And I'll just say this last thing, and then I want to hear from you. This is what I tell my clients. When Belinda and I are having a fight, I will literally take little Terry. I have a composite, about 8 years old. I've worked with him a lot. And I'll put him behind me. And I'll say, look, here's our deal, you and me. I will protect you from the blast of what's coming from my partner. You know, like Superman with his cape. I'll take the hit. You are completely protected back there. But don't you try and deal with Belinda. You let me deal with Belinda. I can do a better job. So I'm loving and protecting and containing those immature parts. And I'm reaching into the relationship with a more aware, mature part. That's the two-step process.
And what gives you the power to do that? So how do you, like, because when we are in these fights, so what decides if we have the presence or the awareness to connect to the mature part, and what is the probability to stay stuck in that young part? So what is actually helpful for us to learn to be more in the adult part? What is the practice, or what can strengthen that part?
Well, I talk about top-down practice work and bottom-up deep healing work. And in the therapy I've created, it's called Relational Life Therapy. We do both. And actually, between the two, the top-down practice is the most important part. People get that wrong because the bottom-up healing is very emotional and cathartic. It's kind of sexy. The top-down practice is everyday, in-the-moment discipline. And I was very pleased. A friend of mine said, because I'm big on discipline, a friend of mine said, the actual meaning of the word discipline is to be a disciple, to be devoted to something. So in that moment, I am trying to remember. I'm doing my best to remember, and it gets better as you practice it, but I'll talk about it. I try to remember that my wife is not the enemy. This is not a zero-sum game. The minute one's a winner and one's a loser, we're both losing. And I try and awaken a relational consciousness, which is really an ecological consciousness. My wife and I are creating a biosphere called our marriage. And it's in my interest to keep that biosphere clean. It's not for her, it's for me. And so I talk to people about what I call enlightened self-interest. Once you start thinking ecologically about your relationship, you're not above it, you're in it. And so you can indulge yourself, for example, and pollute over there with a lot of nastiness. But you breathe it in over here in a lot of passive-aggressive return. And so I try to stay awake to my own interests. It's like there's a part of me that wants to win or prove myself right or control her or retaliate or all those strategies. And I let that come. I'm sure you all have this experience. No, I mean it. Have you not had the experience of the gorge rising and on the tip of the tongue is the nasty thing, and you take a breath and you bring yourself back down? Can I see hands? Have you had that experience? Yeah. We all know how to do that. So it's just, and the other part that I love is that this can be actively cultivated. That you can set your mind to do more of it in the moment. And it's just like going to the gym. You build those muscles. The first time I did it, I was terrible at it. The 3,000th time I did it, I was okay. Now, sometimes you have to take a break and go off by yourself and get recentered. That's fine. But you make a commitment that you're going to use the heat of the moment not to control the other person, but to get centered inside yourself, to do some work inside yourself with that trigger. And that's the commitment, and that's how you use it.
And do you think that your spiritual practice of 40 years, as you said before, helped you with that?
Yes, it helps me a lot. There's a great, I learned this from Al-Anon, but I think it's central to most spiritual traditions, the idea of detachment from outcome. And when I'm in it, in my relationship, I have been captured by an agenda. I want something to happen. I've got to get through to her, or she has to say she's sorry, or, something's got to happen. And I think my 40 years of meditation has allowed me to... It's funny, I do a lot of work with addictions, and Jung said that the cure for addictions had to be spiritual, and I think the cure for all of this has to be spiritual. Because when I'm triggered, it's about control. It's about fear and anger and control. And when I'm in my adult, when I'm centered, it's about being in the moment with what's there, whatever that is. But I don't ask my clients to give up control unless there's some faith in the benevolence of something that's going to hold them up. And I think without that faith in, we call it basic trust, without that faith in what's ultimately spirit, the buoyancy of being held up, it's very hard to have a healthy relationship without that faith.
So that faith is a kind of a resource that we build through our spiritual practice. When that faith is not there yet, or if it hasn't been established yet, so how do you work with somebody? How do you work with somebody that hasn't developed that faith yet, that there is something benevolent holding them? What would you do then?
Well, I think the first relationship that we have to work on is kind of a cliche, but the first one is our relationship to ourselves. And so the first skills I teach people are self-esteem and boundaries. I had a guy, He was the son of an artist. He was himself a renowned artist, the son of a famous artist, the grandson of we all know who the great artist. And he's a sculptor. And he told me that every day in his childhood, every single day, his artist father would come home and see what he'd been building. And he would take it out of his hands and he'd throw it in the wastebasket every day of his life. And he had no sense of self-esteem whatsoever. None. He's never felt self-love. And here's the punchline. He was 80 years old. So I did an exercise with him. I did a Buddhist metta exercise. I had him, many people know it, I had him construct a field of love. Because he was a very good father and he knew how to love his kids. And I had him put his kids in that field of love and feel love for them. And then I took them out and I had him put himself as a little boy in that field and feel permeated by love. And then I had him bring that little boy into his body and let love suffuse his body. And when he was done, I asked him how it was, and he said, I love this. He was quite a poet. He said, it's a little sugar in the coffee cup. You got a little. You know, self-esteem is something we all talk about, but very few people teach people how to do it. It's really about holding on to the thread of connection to yourself in a warm, loving way, even when you're screwing up or being imperfect. And there's also relational esteem, which is similar. It's holding your partner in warm regard, even when they're being a complete jerk and disappointing you. And so these things can be taught and practiced. And then the deep work is about moving into these triggered states, doing trauma work to release some of the energy that you've taken on. That work, too, in the work I do is relational. A lot of people release trauma out into the world or the sky or whatever. Following my mentor, Pia Melody, I believe in bringing imaginatively the people in the room who traumatized you, if you can handle it. And then you give back the energy that you took from them back to them. This is yours. Thanks a lot. I don't want it. So you clear out some of that deep work, and then you actively practice. I gave a talk with Cornel West, the premier American scholar on race, and Gloria Steinem. Cornell was on my right. Gloria was on my left. They were giving talks, and I was in the middle. And Cornell got a standing ovation, and Gloria got a standing ovation. I'm not going to tell you what I got. But my wife was all the way in the back of the room, and she cracked up because she could see me looking down at the floor, saying to myself, I'm enough and I matter. I'm enough and I matter. My kids do this. I've got a 29-year-old kid. They make great fun of having two therapists for parents. They've got a great routine. But my kid, my 29-year-old, will still say, I screwed up the test. I know, Dad, I'm enough and I matter, even though I screwed up. They do that. So self-love is really critical. And an ecological vision, understanding that it's in your interest to make things right between you and your partner. It's not bending over so they win and you lose. It's in your interest. Happy wife, happy life, as they say.
So you shared with me before the negative image that you create of your partner. Maybe you want to talk about a little
Core
bit.
negative image?
Yeah, the core negative image, the concept. I think that's a beautiful way to check oneself when we are triggered. So
Okay, great. So here's a tool that you can all use. I promised that I would, oh good, we got lots of time. That I would download some tools. I wrote about this in the book, The New Rules of Marriage. You can read it there. I also, if I can be whatever, please come to my website, just terryreal.com. There's all sorts of resources there. And your core negative image is who you see your partner as being when you're looking through the spectacles of your partner is the biggest asshole that ever lived in life. When you're there and you're going, this is impossible. I made a terrible mistake marrying this person. That is your core negative image of them. And your core negative image is, the good news about it is it's consistent. It's not a moving target. Can you imagine if it moved, how difficult it would be? Couples have the same fight for 40 years. It's one fight. It's one image. So your core negative image of your partner is an exaggerated version of them at their worst. An exaggerated version of your partner at his or her worst. It's not them at best. It's not even them at baseline. It's not even an accurate description of them. It's kind of like a purple, journalist description, a very flowery description of you at your worst. But okay, having said that, it is nevertheless true. I'm sorry to say. See, I'll do me and Belinda because I'll come out of it. So Belinda has a core negative image of me as a narcissistic, charming, irresponsible, undependable man-child, a boy. I know you're all laughing because you're thinking, how sick must that woman be to think that? Anyway, my core negative image of Belinda is that she is an insatiable, critical, demanding, controlling witch. Now, I feel very fine about coming out of the closet because this is not a rare heterosexual pairing, these two. All right, so here's how it works. So I come home after being on the road. Belinda's there with the little kids. They're old now, but whatever. She flashes out, and she's in a rage when I come home. And she's seeing me through the spectacles of this man-child, this boy. If I know that that's her core negative image, a number of things are possible for me. One is I don't have to take it personally. No, that's big. That's boundary work. I don't have to get all triggered and bent out of shape because she's seeing me that way. It's like, well, this is her core negative. I know. She's talking to that boy. I got it. I know what she's thinking. So it really helps with boundaries. And then the other thing is, if you can tolerate hearing your partner's core negative image of you and vice versa, and they should only be like 5 words the way I said it. Don't go on and on. If you know what your partner's core negative image, you have operating instructions. Because your partner's core negative image of you points in the opposite direction of where you want to go. So if Belinda sees me as irresponsible, and I go, oh, you're making too much of this, she'll go, see, I knew he was irresponsible. Look at the way he answered that. Her core negative image, guess what? Triggers my core negative image of her. The minute she starts criticizing me, then she's that insatiable witch. And our core negative images are arguing with each other, and we could sit down and have a beer. We're done. It's on automatic. So if you know what your partner's core negative image is of you, it takes a lot of the sting out of it. Because what happens is your partner tries to get through to you about what's wrong. They're very exaggerated in what they're describing. You react to the negative exaggeration, and the grain of truth in what's being said gets lost. And so the way out of a core negative image is to be accountable. Yes, I did it. You're right. I'm sorry. And maybe even compassionate. I can see how you might feel bad. But you can't do that if your core negative image triggered and you don't know that and you're not on runaway. So anything I do that's feeling responsible, Belinda will be pleased by. Anything I do that's really irresponsible, I know she'll be triggered by. Anything that she says to me that's really appreciative, I love. And anything she says to me that's really critical will really rile me. So they're operating instructions for your relationship.
So basically, when you work with people, you work with them on seeing that core negative image and then sharing it with their partner in kind of an intimate, maybe facilitated space so that they both can learn to see their core negative images operating with each other. That's the work that you do.
That's exactly right. In the spirit of, this is an exaggerated version of you at your all-time worst. And I don't ask people to share core negative images until they've done some boundary work and some self-esteem work. Otherwise, it'll be too overwhelming for them.
And so what do those core negative images serve? So if it comes up for the person, so what do they serve? Do they have a function that they serve?
That's a great question. Well, this opens up quite a can of worms. Your core negative image is it's a wound. It's always based on a wound or a fear, which is also a wound. And your core negative image is really a combination of the family of origin childhood wounding that you bring to the table, that you're misreading, with the fact that you hired somebody to do exactly the torturous thing they're doing to you. So when people say to me, is my partner really doing this to me, or am I overreacting because of my childhood? The answer is yes, it's both. And I call this the mysticism of marriage. Falling in love means that you believe, whether you're too sophisticated to say it aloud or not, that with this person all will be well. You will be relieved of your family of origin wounding. This will complete you, this will heal you, or at the very least, you'll avoid all that crap. That's who we fall in love with. We all marry someone who's exquisitely designed to stick the burning spear into our eyeball. This does not mean you're in a bad marriage or a long-term relationship. It means you're in a marriage. This is what it is. And our culture gives us no tools or help in navigating how dark that gets. It's really dark. I talk about the dark night of the soul. I follow infant observational research, Ed Tronick in particular. He got this by watching mothers and infants. All relationships are a dance of harmony, disharmony, and repair. Closeness, disruption, and return. And that plays out in a relationship 20 times during the course of one dinner, or it can play out over 10 years as a phase. So the first phase I call love without knowledge. That's the harmony phase, the honeymoon phase. And I do believe there's a soul recognition that this is my person. But you don't know what they do with their closets or their bills or their underwear. It's all very glossy. And partly that is true because we lie. Don't we lie? When you're dating somebody, don't you lie? Don't you present a better picture? I remember I forgot something and we drove off and it closed, it was late, and Belinda said, "Oh, I'm not the kind of girl who worries about that sort of thing." Yeah, right, 30 years later. Anyway, the harmony phase I call love without knowledge. The disharmony phase, or disillusionment, I call knowledge without love. Now you see really clearly all the person's limitations, but you're not very empathic. In fact, you're feeling pretty trapped. And what our culture doesn't teach people is that this hurts. This is dark. You're really wondering if you belong there. That is normal. That's where the skills come in, to get you from disillusionment back into repair. And repair I call mature love or knowing love. This is where you see very clearly your partner's imperfections and you choose to love them anyway, as imperfect as they are. And that's the rhythm of harmony, disharmony, and repair. And we're always falling out of balance and needing to get back into balance, out of balance, into balance.
So maturity would be to know how to embrace that cycle. Maturity would be to know how to embrace that cycle.
Yeah, see, when we're in it, and you got the burning spear in my eye, I am one triggered human being. I'm all about my childhood and my wounding. Mm-hmm. What I want to do, what we all sort of naturally want to do, is I want to get out of that wounding by getting you to do the nice thing for me that would heal me. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I believe it's my impulse to get you to do for me and then to retaliate, either actively or passively when you don't, that produces most of the difficulty. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that in this moment of the heat of the rewounding, if I can lay off getting you to give it to me, and I can give it to me, I can take that little Terry, and I can put him on my lap, and I can soothe him, and I can tell him, you can't yell at Belinda, I'll take care of it. If I can do something different, then that might evoke a truly different response from you, and that heals the wound. Mm-hmm. It's not a direct shot of you heal me, it's we heal me by the work that I do inside the relationship. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, right. And so I hear you talk about the top-down work that we need to do, the discipline, the moment-to-moment practice. And I heard you talk about this cycle. So I would love to hear a little bit more, and maybe then we can open the
yeah, that'd be great.
Space here. But how do you work with what you mentioned before, that a part of the work is working on the original traumatization that underlies the whole dynamic, creates the whole dynamics.
Yes.
So what's your experience? What works? What doesn't work? I mean, is there hope? Is there no hope?
There's so much hope. There's great hope. In the relational life therapy, there are 3 phases, 3 domains. The first is loving confrontation. Thomas, this is what you're doing to blow your own foot off. Most therapists don't do that. They're all about nurture, and they don't confront with the truth. See, I believe that intimacy is the conjunction of truth and love. You were talking about the feeling of being seen. I would bet that if we were to ask people's most deep experience of feeling seen, they would also be feeling loved in who is seeing them. That's healing. And so I would do some work around the trauma. I'd get the person to, with their permission, to begin to reaccess that trauma. I would ask you, Thomas, how old are you in this moment psychologically? I'm 8. And then I would do inner child work with that 8-year-old. And I would bring that 8-year-old out of your body. I would have you talk together. I would have you, the adult, say to that little boy what he needed to hear back then and didn't hear. And then what he needs to tell you about what it's like to be him. And then the ultimate punchline of that process is when you, the adult, say to the little you, I'm here now. I can take care of you. You don't have to be alone with us anymore. So it's not primarily release work, although we do that too. It's primarily relational work. I am going to tend to you, the little me, and conversely, you're not going to run the show. That's how it works. The inner child work, it tends to be extremely emotional. People cry, people throw up, people whatever. But But to me, the important thing is to send you home with a relationship between you and those triggered parts of you, and with the sense that you are the steward of those parts. My friend Dick Schwartz, I'm sure a lot of people know IFS here, Dick Schwartz, Internal Family System, says, you know you're okay when you don't speak from a part, you speak for the part. And it really has to do with which part of you is at the wheel. So the work I do with the triggered wounding is healing work between you and those younger parts of you. And then I send all of you back into the fray with your beloved. That's how it works.
So basically, what I hear you say is you create an attunement of the person to the part that is where the trauma rests, and to create an awareness and a holding that the kind of an internal embrace can happen from the mature part to hold that traumatized part.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And do you see those traumatizations to dissolve slowly, or do you see that they stay, but there is a bigger space around them?
Yeah,
or do they dissolve at a certain time, and so that
I differ from a lot of trauma people. I think that your adaptive child and wounded children are going to be with you till the day you die, but they'll be less intense, and they'll have less power over you. So I would say they're there. They're smaller. They're less hurt. They're less angry, and there's more space around them. Mm-hmm. But the space around them is your loving arms. That's the key. The key is your reparenting. There are three elements to good parenting: limits, guidance, and nurture. And right now in the therapy field, it's all about nurturing those little parts. But I got to tell you, those little parts can create a lot of havoc in your life. So I'm about nurturing them, giving them wisdom, and giving them limits. You're the parent.
That's beautiful. I like it. So what I hear you saying, your experience is that those traumatizations can be maybe reduced. They can be held better, but you see them in your clients staying in a way, but with a higher level of conscious awareness around them. That's your experience.
Yeah, they're still there, but they matter less.
They matter less.
They just don't matter. Mm-hmm. Somebody told me about Ram Dass. Somebody asked him, now that you're enlightened, are you still neurotic? That's a little like your question. And I was told, he said, oh yeah, I'm just as neurotic as I always was, but before I awakened, it was my neurosis, and now it's my neurosis. It's a little like that. My wound. Okay, it's my wound. It's like that.
So great. So maybe everybody in the room has a... So I would say we open.
Yeah, great. Questions, thoughts about your own relationship, about what I said?
I've been married twice. I'm currently in my second marriage. The first one was 20 years. Now I'm into 10 years with my second husband. And my question is, what happens when you have one partner in the relationship who's willing and the other one is not?
You know, you're the only person who's ever asked that question.
And I can see how in my second marriage that there's some qualities that are parts of me being that I can see that wounded child in as I project it and transfer it out. And then I can see how I have done some healing and been able to hold myself, the integrity of myself around that. But then the second marriage, I can still see the same qualities. They're expressed differently. And again, I have someone who doesn't quite want to walk with me, but I also see that that is also my willingness to walk with me.
That's great.
And
Okay, got it.
that's it.
I think I got it. If you're with a partner and you're working and they're not, it all depends on the spectrum. It all depends on what we're talking about. I talk a lot about what I call micro disappointment. So on Thursday, you're in your adult, your partner's in his, we'll say, is it a he or she?
He.
Okay, he's in his adaptive child. When your partner is being immoderate, you try and be moderate a couple, 3 times to see if you can get them back. If you can't, take a break. Don't keep batting your head against the wall. And don't get all bent out of shape because they're not in their adult. You're liable to get in your children in 2 seconds, so you got nothing to be high and mighty about. You don't have to get into shame because it's got nothing to do with you. And you let go. I call this relational integrity. If your partner's in the mud pit and you take a deep breath, and despite every muscle and nerve in your body saying, get down in that mud pit with them, you don't. That is a bad day for your partner, a mixed day for the relationship, and a marvelous day for you. That's relational integrity.
And I feel that quite often. But then ultimately, I lack the intimacy in my relationship.
Yeah, well, it's that ultimate part that's so difficult. If you're feeling overly lonely and that your partner is not at that second level, being able to process the relationship, make things better, whatever, try and bring it up. If you're stuck between the two of you, then to me, that is an indication to go see a therapist and see if the therapist can work on them. And you want a therapist who's going to be really active and take them on, which most therapists don't do. So you really want help when you get help. But if you can't work it out between the two of you, that's a sign to get some help.
And I'm actually quite happy with my marriage, and I love my husband very, very much. And so right now in this moment,
you know what?
good.
I talk to people about what I call making a relational reckoning. You're in a relationship, you're wondering about it, you're stuck with all the imperfections, they're right up front. You ask yourself this question: am I getting enough in this relationship to make grieving what I'm not getting okay with me?
Yeah. Thank
Am
you.
I getting enough to grieve what I'm not getting? And if the answer is no, I'm not, then go back there and fight. But if the answer is yes, like for you, then let go of what you're not getting, feel the grief of it, and embrace what you are getting. And don't walk around like a big victim.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Good.
you.
As you were speaking, my lower stomach just clenched in terms of, oh my gosh, this is, I hope this isn't the future of what relating has to offer. Because it seems like we're sort of compensating. And I was very curious, like, what, if anything, you thought might be the next frontier of what's possible in relationships?
Oh, that's beautiful. The focus of my work for the last 30 plus years has been trying to help men and women, both gay and straight, same-sex, heterosexual, move beyond patriarchy. Because I think the patriarchal system has no interest in intimacy. In fact, it's frightened by intimacy. It's frightened by adults, likes children. And so I think the next step, and I'm watching young people, and I'm very pleased with, I'm a big fan of millennial men. Yeah, go ahead. You know what, for all of your much commented upon narcissism, millennial men are the most egalitarian, expect joint decision making, expect to help out in the house by and large, are universally for gay marriage. We've come a long way in 50 years of the women's movement and the men's movement. And I'm a big look where we're headed is true mutuality between the sexes, and true mutuality in your living room and your bedroom. It's not just about compensating for what isn't, but the shadow will always be with us, and we'll always have to work with the shadow. That's where the juice comes in. Ed Tronick, the Harvard researcher, taught me harmony, disharmony, repair. He's been researching this for 20 years. He believes it's the move from disharmony back into repair that makes for a deep relationship. That is what intimacy is. It's not, we all long for perfection. We all long to be with a god or goddess. I have narcissistic guys who walk in and actually have a list of what they want. They've dated for 20 years, they can't find the right one. So I actually have them write the list. Long legs, speaks 3 languages, a porn queen in the bedroom, a CEO in the boardroom. And I say, I have them read it out loud. And then I say, the only question you got to ask yourself is, if you could find this woman, what would she want with you? We long for perfection, and we feel deeply entitled to perfection, to be honest. But it's the collision of your human imperfections with mine that makes the relationship. It's the collision of your dark and my dark and how we manage it, both individually and as a couple. That is the stuff of intimacy. So, I just think it's a process. And each turn of the wheel can drive you deeper into your own material and deeper into trusting your partner to handle it.
And Terry, that going into that depth, I think, is the second part of my question, which is, what role do you think integrating those childhood traumas and wounds might how might that impact relationships going into the future? I mean, do you think that could actually be one of the keys to opening up a greater intimacy because I'm no longer carrying that baggage around from the past?
Yes, although I still think you are carrying around that baggage from the past. I just think that it's not as powerful a force in your life as you do the work. What happens is, it's like self-esteem, if I may. You start off like this: shame, 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 grandiosity, health, health, grandiosity, grandiosity, shame, shame, shame. And as you do this work, because I teach people to intervene on self-esteem, when they're one up, bring yourself down. When you're one down, bring yourself up. And what happens is that over time, and I'm talking a few years, as you're intervening, it goes like shame, okay, health, 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 grandiosity, health, health, health. And as you intervene, the spikes get less, they're less intense, you recover faster, and the bottom line is you spend more time, your baseline becomes health. Same thing with a couple. It starts off fighting distance, and connection. And as you deal with your wounding and you deal with your partner, the disruptions are less intense, you recover from them more quickly, and they're less frequent. So the net is you're enjoying each other's company a hell of a lot more.
And this also might be part of the spiritual journey then.
It's all spiritual.
Yeah.
It's all spiritual. Except there are some moments when Belinda I don't think is spiritual. But I suspect she would disagree. But
something you just said really grabbed me, and it was in talking about what we expect in a partner. And you said we all want gods.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could talk about the importance of a higher power. The connection is, Thomas would say, to the meridian, as a necessary component to a relationship. Like if you believe that, or if that's necessary as well.
The poet T.S. Eliot wrote a stanza I like a lot with relationships. He said, between the ideal and the real falls the shadow. Between the ideal and the real falls the shadow. And I believe that what we ultimately want in our relationships is perfect union. And it's our grappling with our partner's humanity and our own which makes for real intimacy. Maybe angels can be, perfectly communed with one another all the time. I think personally that might be a little boring, but I'm Jewish, so you never know. And I'm a New Yorker too, so. But I don't hold up the ideal or the wish for unbroken communion. There's another level. There's one level at which it keeps breaking all the time, and we have to keep correcting for it. There's another level at which I trust me and Belinda to correct for it. And that's what stays unbroken, is our process, not the particulars. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, and what I'm hearing, and maybe you can kind of expound on it, is that relationship is the path to God, that there is no ideal. There is no ideal, that relationship in its...
I have a saying for my patients, I don't want anybody to do better than me and Belinda. It makes me mad. So you can be as ideal as I am, and no more.
Thank you.
I think it's the reality of our relationships. It's the opportunity. I don't want a perfect relationship. A perfect relationship isn't going to drive me deeper into my work. It's precisely grappling with my imperfection and yours that is the engine that drives me down. That's what I want.
And so just for clarification, the idea of a higher power, whatever that is, how does that factor into your relationship with Belinda?
Well, there were parts of me, and I think that's what I've been talking about, that would make her my higher power and be dependent on that, and then be pretty nasty when she didn't meet my expectation. And I talk to people who are codependent that way or love addicted that way about reappropriating abundance. Your partner didn't walk off with all the abundance. It's still right here with you. And so I think if you can stay centered and you can stay in touch with something that's alive and vital in you, then the wear and tear of the relationship, it becomes your dharma. It becomes the point of your awareness instead of an oppressive force that you're trapped by. The thing doesn't change. It's our relationship to the thing that changes.
We're talking a lot about dyads. And I'm just wondering, for me, the question is the next frontier a dyad alone? And what's the role for community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I hope the next frontier is not for dyads alone. I think there's too many dyads alone as things now stand. And it's what my friend Esther Perel calls the grand ambition of love. We ask that other person to be for us what a whole village used to be for us. And it's a lot to ask. So I hope that there is ongoing support. Because patriarchal culture does not support adults, intimacy, recovery, transformation, I ask the people I work with before I let them go out into the world to create what I call a relationship cherishing subculture around them and their family. Friends, support groups, 12-step groups, meditation groups, but something that's going to feed that alive part of you in a way that the culture doesn't at large. So I'm hoping to change the culture at large, but until it changes, I want you to create a little culture around you.
Another part of that question would be, how do you relate to polyamorous relations? Polyamorous relations.
What kind of relations?
Polyamorous.
Oh, polyamorous.
Yeah. So the question is, there is a whole movement that is coming up more and more in the culture that says, okay, monogamous relationships are maybe not the call of our future. So how do you work with this? How do you relate to it?
My favorite quote is Alexandre Dumas. He wrote, "The chains of matrimony are so heavy, it takes two people to carry them, sometimes three." Polyamory is not infidelity. Infidelity is not a good thing because there's always transgression and there's always lying. Polyamory is precisely trying to eradicate that by being open. I have no Terry's little rule book about whether you should be monogamous or an open marriage. For example, when I'm training heterosexual therapists, you have to let them know that in male gay culture, monogamy is not necessarily the norm. It's at least as prevalent, certainly before AIDS it was prevalent, and now it's coming back, that it be a primary relationship with flings on the side that don't interfere. I call it the European model, no offense. So there are all sorts of ways to arrange this, but the key is it compassionate? Is it really intimate and connected? If it's polyamorous, are both people equally wanting it, or is some person going along in a power play? That's got to be thought about. But there's no rules about how to do this.
I'm working with a bunch of young people right now, and there are 3 girls becoming boys, and a number of these kids want to be called they. And I was invited recently to a party called a fuck gender party. So I'm trying to see what the changes are in the youth around gender. It seems tremendous, at least in these colleges that I've been part of, and how you see them relating so differently, choosing a gender, not wanting to be identified with a gender, and how to work relationship that is kind of not so gender-based.
Well, I think we're exploding the concept of gender altogether. And men being manly and women being womanly, it turns out to be really helpful in the bedroom. And that's about it, as far as I can see. I like whole people. And I think where we're heading is whole people. I want to have strong, big-hearted, responsible men, and I want to have competent, assertive, loving, voiced women. I want us all to be whole. And what gender socialization does is it takes aim at us and gives us half of our human qualities and surrenders the other half to the other sex. I want that stopped. And the most concrete example of that are these kids who are changing genders or gender. I know a kid, a friend of ours, he's got hair down to here, toenails and finger polish, makeup, and a smoking hot girlfriend. And it's like, welcome to 2018. It's fine with me. Those aren't the key. The key is, do you have integrity? Do you tell the truth? Are you with yourself? Are you with the other person? Are you compassionate? This is the same no matter what the structure of the relationship is. Before we get to the next question, there's one little tool I wanted to, if I might, give you. I promised myself I'd do this before we left. And what I'm working on these days is teaching people how to stand up for themselves with love. Stand up for yourself with love. You see, I believe that in patriarchy, you can either be connected or you can be powerful, but you can't be both at the same time. Women are connected, men are, the feminine is connected, the masculine is powerful, and there's no union. And so what I'm teaching people in my office these days is how to say, I don't like what you're doing, could you please do it this way instead of that way, in a way that leaves the partner feeling cherished even while you're correcting things. And the way you do that is by appreciating them before you give them the feedback, stating your good intentions. I'm saying this to you because I want to be closer to you. And it's moving from negative language to positive language. People in general, and men in particular, are criticism phobic. You don't need criticism. Just make your request. I would really like it if you would, ... which gives your partner the chance to do it, as opposed to a complaint, which gives them nothing but an apology. So I want people to be more proactive about their relationships and less resentful, and really reach in and shape your partner. I would like 10 minutes of empathic listening. Empathic means, they're there, I'm sorry, that sucks, tell me more about it. Could you give me 10 minutes of that? I want people to say that up front rather than wait, speak, have the partner fail, and then criticize them for failing. Our relationship to relationships in this culture is passive. You get what you get, and then you deal with it. I want us to wake up, identify what our wants and needs are, put them out in the spirit that you're not entitled. Sometimes you'll get them, sometimes you won't, but they're worth the try. And put them out in a way that cherishes your partner and cherishes the relationship at the same time that you're cherishing yourself or standing up for yourself. So for example, instead of, I don't like how you're talking to me, you better stop talking to me like that, you say, I want to hear what you have to say. Could you tone it down so I could really listen? Two ways of saying the same thing. I'll tell you a story. I like stories. So I had a young couple, and it was a classic heterosexual deal. He wanted sex all the time. She wanted sex none of the time. So I got them talking off of their positions onto what does sex mean? And like a lot of men, for this young man, sex meant closeness and desirability, and that he's loved, that he's cared for. So we floated this guy, this is a true story. 2 weeks later, they come back, they're all grins, it's solved. I say, okay, what did you do? He said, the woman said, the next time my husband came up and wanted sex, instead of my usual, I walked over to him, gave him a hug, and gave him a big kiss. I looked him in the eyes and I said, the first thing I want you to know is you are really hot. I am really attracted to you. You're a wonderful man. You're a wonderful lover. Physically, I think you're really handsome. And no, I don't want sex right now. And to everyone's amazement, he went, okay. Give to your partner even while you're asking something from them. Give them.
I have two questions. One is more about you. We were entertaining the question earlier, I guess yesterday, about what keeps us on our path, what got us there. And I'm wondering what in your life turned you to face patriarchy in the honest way that you have. And the second question is, when relationships don't work, is that often, I'm wondering if when the child is not behind the adult, but in the driver's seat, and then chooses a relationship from that place, do those relationships end up not working out often? Because you might, if you've had trauma as a child, you might really pick someone who's really not good for you.
Yeah, the great questions both. Wow. How did I get involved with my resistance to
What turned
patriarchy?
you around to really face honestly being a man? And years ago, I remember picking up your work and thinking, wow, this guy really challenges men. And I found that you just didn't do equal.
No, I don't do equal.
You were really well, you guys have a lot of work to do. Women have been doing their work, and now it's your turn. And I thought that was really refreshing and honest in some way.
Well,
what gave you the courage to do that? Because that had to come from you first, I guess. Was there a person that you met?
I'll tell you. I was bathed as a child in the most, maybe not the most, but certainly a toxic form of masculine power. And that's been my karma. That's been my Zen koan. What is right relationship to power in general and masculine power in particular? And earlier in my life, I was grandiose. And I seized that power in ways that were not useful. Later in life, I tried to divest of the power I had because I thought it was destructive. And I'm sitting here with you now and Thomas. I feel in pretty right relationship to power. Let it flow through you and don't own it, and be grateful. So that's patriarchy. In terms of, and I'm just passionate that the traditional roles of men and women, cut off men and unhappy women, is the norm. And we have to disassemble that structure if we're really going to be happy with each other. I'm not blown away when couples part. If there are children involved, I prefer that they stay together. But if they're not meant for each other, they're not. In terms of adaptive children picking your partner, yes, it can work well because that's mostly what happens. And there are times when it's time to go. If you have one partner who is egregiously abusive and not interested in doing any of the work, it may be time to go. That has to do with that relational reckoning that I talked about. But I don't believe in staying miserable for eternity because of some duty. I don't think it works. So when people break up, that's okay with me. What I don't want is a continuation of the same miserable pattern over and over and over again. If they transform, great. If they dissolve, less great. But I don't want them just beating the crap out of each other unto death.
I guess what I'm getting is that there's something about self-esteem, the building up of self-esteem when you reach that humble moment of realizing you've been a jerk or something like that.
My friend Mel Buchholz mentored me on that.
Say that again, sorry.
A friend of mine, Mel Buchholz, was my explicit mentor about how I was becoming successful, and it went to my head, and I was a jerk. And I knew it, and people confronted me about it. And I went to people and I said, how do I handle this? And my friend Mel said, you stand right up into the power. You don't pretend it's smaller than it is. You let it be big, but it's not yours. It's passing through you. So you're proud of your cooperation with it and your part in it, but you neither pretend it's smaller than it is, nor do you own it. I think that's where we are. It's communion. Rianne Eisler talks about a model of power over, which is patriarchy, or power with. And I think power with is the new territory for all of us.
Say hallelujah. I mean, I'm asking this in part because I think humanity is facing the same situation in regards to our more than human world.
It is.
And it's like that humble moment it is facing us. And how do we do that? And I guess I just got the answer. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Early on, you said something about men being hypersensitive to criticism. And I wanted you maybe to share a little bit more if you can talk about that.
What a stupid question. No, I will. There's actually, it's actually a complex answer. There are about 5 strands that go together to make men defensive. And I'm not going to do them all, but traditionally, men's self-esteem is not inside out. It's outside in. That's how the culture teaches it. And it's particularly for men about performance. I can close this deal. I can give my wife an orgasm. Everything becomes a performance. And when the performance goes, you go. And so a lot of men have a very high stand. You know, in the world of men, it's power over. It's one up or one down. You're either a winner or a loser. And so if somebody's confronting you about some imperfection, a lot of men will feel like, if I let this in, I'm sunk. If I let this in, I'm worthless. It's either perfect or worthless. And so they protect their own fragile sense of self-esteem by warding off the issue or the criticism. A woman can help by being less critical and more instructive. This is what I would like. But at the end of the day, it's our job to deal with that. We have to understand that our value is not based on externals. Our value comes from our hearts. And that's the big lesson for men right now.
So, well, we almost at the end of our time. Is there anything that you want to share? Anything that hasn't been said that you think is important to you?
Yeah. I want to really profoundly thank you for bringing me and for your support of my work. And Amy, is Amy here somewhere? Yeah, Amy, my darling. And I want to thank you. This wasn't the easiest talk. I'm used to sitting, behind a podium and slides and being a professor, and it feels a little naked to be out here. And I felt wonderfully received by all of you. So I just want to thank you for welcoming me. Thank you.